there's also an information bomb. The proliferation of information about everything is so great that no individual can possibly grasp it. Not only has he difficulty in grasping it, but there is difficulty even for big committees to organize this information, to integrate it in such a way that if I need to know a certain thing, I can very swiftly find it out. For an individual untrained in physics, it's very difficult to find out quickly about physics, because physics is expressed in a mathematical language which he probably has never learned to read. So the time lag in scanning, you see, all consciousness is a matter of scanning. And it takes in the totality of events in the world by a sweeping motion, like the glance of our eyes round a room. Well, it takes time to glance your eyes round the room and register what's there, if you want to remember it consciously. So what we are saying is that the intelligence of the system, the synergy, is more intelligent than any individual consciousness can be. But, of course, you are much more than consciousness in this scanning sense, because you certainly don't arrange the complexities of your own brain by conscious decision. That's something that you grow. Or we could put it this way, that the intelligence of the universe grows as it grows you. But here again is another hurdle for the average Westerner, whose common sense is derived from the philosophy of science current in the 19th century, of thinking that the organization of the universe is intelligent. That seems to us to echo of theism, of God ideas where God is based on an anthropomorphic or man-like image, the old gentleman who whistles in the sky. And of course that God is dead, beyond recall. But that's not the only kind of God. To think of the universe itself, its vast and complex organization, as being intelligent, what on earth does that mean? What do you mean by the word intelligent? Well, when you come to think of it, it's the most difficult word to define. Everybody knows what it is, but very few can say. It's like you know what love is, but just try and define it. You know what time is, but try and define that. Space. Everybody knows what space is, but it's the most difficult thing to pin down. And that's equally true of intelligence. We can see certain elements in intelligence. We can see complexity as an element of it. We can see complexity as what we call an orderly arrangement of different clusters of complexity. But again, we're using words, all of which are imprecise. What do you mean orderly? That's practically to say it's all in order, but almost like saying it's intelligently arranged. We recognize these things, but we are not quite sure what we mean by them. But we recognize them at once. And for example, if we begin with the pure hypothesis that we ourselves are intelligent, and let it go at that. If we're not, then nothing is. But let's, for the sake of argument, say that we human beings are intelligent. Now, if that is so, then the environment in which we live must also be intelligent. Because we are symptoms of that environment, and I don't for the life of me see how you can have intelligent symptoms of an unintelligent organization. We belong in this world. We didn't arrive here from somewhere else. We're not tourists in the universe. We're expressions of it. Like branches express the tree, or fruit express the tree. And so you will not find an intelligent organism living in an unintelligent environment, that is to say, the environment in which you live will be a system of mutual cooperation between a vast complexity of different kinds of organisms. And the total balance of that makes your life possible. In other words, human life goes with, as front goes with back, an extremely complex bacteriological world, which sometimes diseases us, but most of the time assists us by its colonies, its societies, its methods of reproduction. All these complex interrelations are the which, without which not, the sine qua non of there being blood and veins and bones and intestines and all that kind of thing. That's only the bacteriological world. In addition to that, there's a world of insects, which is tremendously important to us. But the insects are extremely clever. And if you talk to a good entomologist, he will scare the wits out of you, because he will show you the most conclusive reasons why insects should ultimately take the whole planet over. Fortunately, we are not absolutely abominated by flies, because we have lots of spiders, and we have birds. And so birds and insects are mutually necessary to each other, and especially flowers and insects have an arrangement with each other whereby one could say of flowers and bees that although they look very different, they are one and the same organism. Flowers, perfume and color. Bees buzz and fly around. But you can't have the flowers without the bees, and you can't have the bees without the flowers. And so you can think through relationships between every conceivable kind of organism, into which you must add things like atmosphere qualities, gas content of atmosphere, on and on and on, until you suddenly realize that what you call your mind and intelligence and your very brain and body is utterly involved with this network of other kinds of organisms existing at a special temperature in certain gases, which could only be found in certain kinds of solar system. Now then, seeing that, you should give every technologist pause. Because you must allow yourself, therefore, to feel that what you see is not merely something out there. It's in your head. And your head's in it. And these things mutually interpenetrate each other like this. Now it's in your head. Now your head's in it. Now it's in your head. Now your head's in it. Like this, you see. And this rhythm sets up what we call vision. So if you see that the external world is as much you as anything inside your skin or anything inside your head, then you have a certain respect for it. And no longer consider matter, for example. Take a piece of wood. A piece of wood is not just a chunk of stuff. But people think about wood that way. You can't be a good carpenter if that's the way you think about wood. We think we're dealing, you see, with these inert, unfeeling blocks of stuff. Rocks have no feelings, of course, banging around. Mountains have no feelings. Blow them up with dynamite. But they do have feelings. And if you heard them, as the Indians say, I've just been with a whole bunch of Indians, they say the continent of the United States is getting ready to shake us off, as a dog would shake off fleas. And they say the storms are going to get worse, the earthquakes worse, the floods worse, and the insect pests will multiply in all sorts of strange ways, and finally get rid of us and leave the land to the Indians who originally owned it. Let's have a brief intermission. The question arose this morning about the problem of whether the extension of the network, especially by electronics, might not abolish individual privacy. And I said I was planning to devote this afternoon's session to that problem and some of its ramifications. This, of course, is the area of the problem with which Marshall McLuhan is very largely concerned. For he has pointed out that just as the wheel is an extension of the feet, and as beyond the wheel naturally comes the horse and carriage, the automobile, and the airplane, all these technological creations are extensions of the human organism. And finally, the electronic network of telephone, telegraph, radio, and television is an extension of the nervous system. And into that we must throw, as an additional extension of the nervous system, the computer. The computer into which data can be fed from the files of the insurance companies, the Internal Revenue Service, the police, the credit agencies, everything. So that in a matter of seconds, when an individual is identified, an enormous amount of information about him can be instantly known. In a rather similar way, the time is not too far ahead when you will be able to have a box about so big on your desk, which has a little screen on it and a dial. And after dialing a key code, you will dial the catalog number of any book in the Library of Congress that you want to read. And at any rate that you wish, the spread pages of that book will appear on your television screen. And you can get it right like that. When we get to the television worked with the agency of laser beams, you will of course be able to see solid three-dimensional images in color projected in a certain area, and you can walk around it. I haven't discovered yet whether you can kiss it. But when you get a phenomenon like that, it begins raising the question of where somebody actually is. When the reproduction becomes technically perfect, you see, you won't know the difference between the reproduction and the original. That's going to be a new kind of confusion. And we will perhaps even be able to think about the word reproduction in a new sense. We say now, one of the meanings we give to the word reproduction is sexual reproduction of the species, or the biological method. Then we have reproduction through photocopy, and all that kind of thing. Let's suppose, too, that we begin increasingly to be able to manufacture the parts of the human body in very perfect kinds of plastic. So that when your heart goes wrong or your kidneys go wrong, the surgeon will simply replace them with a plastic reproduction, which will work equally well. And perhaps they'll never be able to reproduce in plastic the brain, but they can at least put in there a radio device which will connect with a computer system of some kind, which will do the same job. So that then, after the years go by and your parts have been replaced, the serious question arises as to, are you the same individual? And we would say, well, no, you've been entirely replaced. Of course it does. You're being replaced all the time, though by a different method. And just as, say, an institution like the University of California, which is a very rapidly changing university, for some mysterious reason it remains the University of California, recognizable as such, even though the students, the faculty, the office and administrative staffs, and the very buildings themselves are in a state of flux, so that they hardly remain a constant for 5 years in succession. What then is the university? The university is a pattern of behavior. And the organisms involved in that pattern keep changing. But the pattern retains an identifiable continuity. So does your body. So does the whirlpool in the stream. So do the hot springs down below, although the water is running through them all the time and is never the same. So you can envisage the reproduction of the human being in this electronic way, and at first you say, oh, horrors. Are we going to be converted into nothing but plastic replicas of ourselves? Will we be there in any sense anymore? Will the soul survive it? But you see, in the case of the University of California, it is what we call the University of California that is the soul. And its bodily expression keeps changing. So, when we find out that we are electronic echoes of ourselves, being perpetuated through the ages, we shall come to the astonishing conclusion that that's what we already are. Only we have to do it again ourselves in order to realize it. We are already the most remarkable electronic patterns from the standpoint of physics. So let's a bit lay that bugbear to rest. Although I must say, there is something about plastic in its present stage of evolution that is somewhat repulsive. There is a state of consciousness which those who are psychedelically hip or hep call the plastic doll, in which everything looks as if it's made of plastic, as if or patent leather or enameled tin, that it only reflects light and has no light inside it. There is another side to the vision, whereby everything becomes living jewelry with light inside, a kind of beatific vision as distinct from a diabolic vision. And at the present stage of its development, plastic always suggests the diabolic vision. But it is through the diabolic vision that you gather the deepest insights. It's really profounder than the beatific vision in a certain way. Because if you can go down into any experience, the other side of it will be a set of buttons, over which you just place your finger to activate them. You'll be able to dial world information, who will give you the number of any given individual. If he doesn't answer, he's dead. So under such circumstances, absolutely no one can get lost. And then you see, as this moves on, let me develop some of its further possibilities. People like Toynbee and McLuhan have noted that as technology progresses, there enters into it a quality of what they call etherealization. And this is connected with Teilhard de Chardin's doctrine of peduncles. Peduncles aren't exactly relatives. And we have to understand first the doctrine of peduncles. Now, here it is. Here is a globule. It might be an amoeba, or it might be oil in water, suspended. And this globule is going to separate. First it does this. Then it does this. Then it does this. And then it does this. See? Now, these things here are peduncles. From the Latin root pes, pedis, meaning a foot. Some sort of protrusion out of a globular body. So notice then that the production of a peduncle, here in the form of a connecting neck, and here in the form of little tails when the neck is broken, that in the course of the development, when we reach this stage, the peduncles have disappeared. According to de Chardin, this is why we do not find missing links around in the evolutionary process. They vanished in accordance with the law of peduncles. Now, in exactly the same way, the human technology sets up certain kinds of peduncles. A road, for example, or a railroad is a peduncle, because with the development of automotive traffic, truck traffic, the railroads become increasingly obsolete. And there are rusty old tracks lying all over the country that are not used anymore. And then with the development of aircraft, the road tends to become obsolete. With the development of radio, the wire as a connection, as a peduncle, becomes obsolete. So that more and more, the connecting links that we saw in a visible way disappear with the development of more expert types of communication. We can easily take this a step further. When we develop a form of electronic communication, such that you don't even need to take a plane. You want to see, supposing I want to see my father in England. We both have these laser beam TV jobs. And just like that, I can recreate in front of him myself and my exact environment, everything around, just as if he was sitting in the room. And I can do that with his set on the other end. So that eventually we don't need to take the plane. You can conceive, as some science fiction writers have, what seems to us a rather appalling situation, where you never need to leave the place where you're sitting. All food supplies and everything are automatically delivered. You just dial what you want, and some kind of mechanical process transmits it to you. Then they go further than that. They don't. They really abolish food altogether, because they've got it down to some special essences which you take. Then they go beyond that, and you give yourself a certain kind of electronic stimulation, and it does all for you that food could ever do. And then you think, oh dear, what's the next step beyond that? Of course. The next step beyond that is, of course, there's one thing yet, one peduncle we have to get rid of. And that is the black box, the electronic gadget. Because by the time we have become as etherealized as that, we move into telepathy and psychic communication. And as soon as you make that step, of course, it would seem that all privacy whatsoever has gone. Because what you are inside is an open book to everybody else. Your thoughts are easily read. And therefore, you may say at first, ooh, that is the conversion of humanity into an anthill of the worst type. And this is, in a way, naturally, what all properly educated Americans, and I will add properly educated Britishers, and some other peoples, dread. It is said the Englishman's home is his castle. And everybody needs a castle, a place where you can get away from it all, and just be yourself. But even then, when you're away from it all and you're just being in yourself, you've unfortunately got a lot of thoughts inside your head that aren't yours. Because you think in the English language, and that was given to you by other people, and contains their prejudices, that you can't avoid them in thinking. Japanese people will say that when they think in Japanese, they can have certain feelings that are characteristically Japanese. But when they start thinking in English, they can't have those feelings. And so you are very, very much really in the sphere of public influence when you start to think. And if you listen carefully to your thoughts, insofar as they are uttered in words, and they very often are, try and discover the tone of voice in which certain of your thoughts are being said, and you will listen and hear your mother, or you will hear an aunt, or you will hear a school teacher, or will hear certain friends expressing their opinions and telling you who you are and how you ought to behave. And you think those are your thoughts, and they're nothing of the kind. An inner pandemonium under the dome of the skull is going on all the time. Myriads of voices, myriads of influences from outside working upon you, even when you are physically quite alone. So, this means that you are not nearly as much of a private individual as you think. You are also, of course, exercising these influences upon other people. You're telling them who they are, what you think about them, what you think of their behavior. And even if they don't believe you, they nevertheless pay very serious attention to it. They can't help it. You can take the experiment, for example, that B.F. Skinner used to try, which is very terrifying. He would send two members of the class, selected arbitrarily, outside of the room. Then he would arrange two chairs, chair A and chair B. He would say to the class, now look, when these people come back, we're going to engage them in a conversation. Whatever A says, agree with him. Whatever B says, disagree with him. So they come back into the room and they take their seats and a conversation begins. Now B may be a very strong-headed, articulate person, and A really rather feeble. But what happens is this, that by group agreement with anything A says, he is encouraged, he is built up, he becomes more articulate, he finds himself sprouting. But B, by being disagreed with on every point, begins to get baffled and confused and feel very uncomfortable indeed. Unless he is onto the game and he challenges the whole group, I see now what you're playing. You have made up your minds to disagree with everything I say. Therefore, of course, you don't count. I shall pay no attention to you. So, in this way, you see, we're already colossally influenced by each other. And this is why I think that Harry Stack Sullivan's basic ideas about psychopathology are in some respects more profound than Freud's. Freud is always looking into the individual history, into the physiology, into the depth psychology of the individual in an interior sort of way. But Sullivan was always looking to the individual as the expression of a social network. And the same in the psychology of George Herbert Mead, where he called the conceptions that we have of ourselves the interiorized other. In other words, the sum total of all the things that people have told us we are. Because you do not know yourself as a self, except in a society. Just as you do not exist biologically without a father and a mother, you do not carry on an existence without a society, and the reactions of other people to you provide you with the mirror in which you attain a realization of yourself. you know who you are in terms of your relationships with others. So then now, when we contemplate this disappearance of privacy and a completely integrated human society, we can look at this from two different points of view, pro and con. Let us first look at the pro point of view. How great to have nothing to hide. How great to give up all worries about ownership. Because you could say, if somebody says they would like something you have, and you say, please, have it. Because you know very well you can go to someone else and say, could I have that? And they'll give it to you. And so all the way around, there is no propriety, in the sense not of prudish propriety, but propriety in the sense of possession. Also, of course, in the sense of prudish propriety. Nobody has any dirty little secrets, because if I have any dirty secrets, I know very well that you have too, and so let's drop the whole pretense and let go.
This is a man?
So in this sense, there might be a very, very close fellowship between all people, in which there are no barriers, no defenses, and we all cooperate together beautifully and love each other. Now, let's look at the con point of view. The con point of view would say, yes, but surely, the more we communicate with each other in that way and have no property, and there are no boundaries, and there are no fences or defenses, then, just in the same way that jet aircraft makes all cities the same city, so this would make all people the same individual. Would that be what the Hindus mean by saying you are all one, you are all the Godhead in disguise? Would it mean that? Now, part of our difficulty in approaching this is that we begin from the standpoint of a certain conception of the individual person. And this is, of course, the Christian ego, which is the soul as a center of action and something alive with consciousness and intelligence that lies hidden in the bag of skin. As, for example, King John says in Shakespeare's play to Hubert, within this wall of flesh there is a soul comes the unrender, and with advantage means to pay by love. See the image? Within this wall of flesh there is a soul. Within the castle there is the king. And every man's home is his castle. And so those of us who are brought up in that way, to feel A, that we are basically the soul in the body, and B, that every soul that exists is of infinite value in the eyes of God. We therefore have instituted, since the Industrial Revolution, a tremendous technological campaign to preserve the individual. We have all kinds of social services, hospitals, ambulances, medicine, welfare agencies, every kind of thing, with the one aim of preserving life, getting you to live longer, and giving what is called full opportunity for the development of your personality. To the myriads of Asia, this is almost unbelievable. And then, of course, we are teaching the peoples of Asia medicine and sanitation, industrialization, so that every single child can be regarded not as so much waste human material, which because it's sick has to be thrown away, but as some individual to be loved and cherished and properly treated. And because individuality, the human, each particular human organism is infinitely precious. That is the moving ideal of the sort of people who first created the great hospitals, who abolished slavery, who abolished the death penalty for trivial offenses, who made that great humanitarian movement of the 19th century associated with such people as Wesley and Charles Dickens and Wilberforce and so on, to rescue the precious individual from the ravages of impersonal disease or impersonal political exploitation. Then, when a kind of American capitalist liberalism achieved to some extent this sort of ideal, we look then at political forms which are socialistic or communistic and are leery of them because they seem to go back on all that. So, of course, did National Socialism in Germany. Because the position there is, it is not the individual who is the supremely important being, but it is the community, the state, which is supremely important. The individual realizes himself as a servant of the state. But our theory in the liberal capitalism of the United States is that the state is the servant of the individual. That we employ policemen and soldiers and sanitary inspectors and Department of Commerce officials, all to serve us. We call them public servants. And when a policeman gets uppish, he has to be reminded that we pay his salary and that his job is to serve us and not to be a kind of Admirable Crichton sort of butler who takes the upper hand. But of course, the very idea of a servant still has in it, doesn't it, something aristocratic. And as we all know, in this country, it is increasingly difficult to get services of any kind. More and more, it is felt beneath the individual's dignity to be, say, a waiter, a barber. After all, they give you a certain kind of service. Certainly, it's beneath anyone's dignity to shine shoes, because that's the feet, and that's very low down. It's like kissing people's feet. To give massage, to do all these things for other people that are rather material skills. Increasingly, you have to get them in another way, either by a do-it-yourself system or by some sort of machinery. And so in the same way, people who used to give service want to translate themselves professionally. People who were formerly called undertakers now call themselves morticians. Janitors call themselves maintenance services. I suppose barbers will soon call themselves tonsorial experts. All sorts of things like that are happening right now in order to give the sense of equality all round. And so the guy who gives you gas at the garage will notice your first name on your credit card and will address you by it. I get very irritated to be called Al. I just don't respond to that form of address at all. But I suppose that's my British snobbishness. But here it is, you know, everybody slaps everybody's back. Now, I was very puzzled by this when I first came to live in California, because here the use of first names and this kind of familiarity is extraordinarily common. And when I found myself on first name terms with a man who was in a certain sense my boss, who was the president of the University of the Pacific, I felt distinctly uncomfortable. And the reason I felt uncomfortable was that I felt the whole thing was insincere. That there was not the kind of relationship between us which would normally be represented by being on first name terms. But there was what was much worse, and sort of effort to prove that there really ought to be that kind of relationship when neither side had any intention of forming it. That's very baffling if you come from outside. And you don't know, I suppose, what all good born and bred Californians know. What are the cues? The subliminal cues which distinguish one form of first name address from another. Of course, what eventually happens is that people have two first names. The published one and the nickname, known only to an intimate circle. used only by an intimate circle. But you see, what we see in this then is the creeping socialism, the creeping abolition of what is precious and what is private and what is property, and feel that as that disappears and as all fences disappear, the collection of human beings will simply dissolve into an amorphous mass. And indeed, there is a danger in that. We have seen people disappear into amorphous masses. We have seen Hitler's legions. We have seen the things that Chinese can do with what the military tactic called the human sea, when swarms and swarms of troops, all identically uniformed, are absolutely thrown at the enemy in wave after wave after wave. But let us not forget that the generals of the Western powers did exactly the same thing in the First World War. On both sides. They used the tactics of the human sea, in which the lives of individuals meant nothing whatsoever.